Thanks for dropping in. This week I have a new project that uses empty filament spools, a random decision wheel. This highly customizable device can be used for any scenario where you'd want to theatrically present a random selection, sort of in the manner of the big wheel from The Price is Right. You can use it to thwart indecisiveness, make mission-critical business decisions, complicate tabletop gaming scenarios, or create a thinly veiled framing device for a YouTube video. In my last filament spool project, the vertical parts drawer, I mentioned how these empty spools have a tendency to pile up. Many locations don't accept the spools for recycling because they're either not labeled or made from a polymer that the recyclers just won't support. Ideally, I'd like these spools to be made out of cardboard or some other material that's easy to recycle. But since that's not often the case, I want to repurpose them into new projects. This project is very easy to print. For my own copy, I used 2 perimeters and 10% infill. But honestly, you could probably get by with 5% or maybe even 0% infill on some of the parts. These 2 parts are used to assemble the stand. They can both be printed flat like this. These rail pieces are a little bit more complicated, but if printed with this side flat down on the bed like so, these overhangs never exceed 45 degrees, so no supports are needed here either. Finally, there are these optional insert pieces that slide into the grooves inside the rails. There's a slight curve on these pieces so they cannot be printed flat like this, but just tilt them up and they're still a very easy print. When in doubt, I do add brims onto my prints. Brims help prevent warping, are easy to remove, and don't mar the quality of the print. Assembly requires no glue. If your measurements are correct and your clearances are tight, these rail pieces will snap onto the edge of your spool like this. If this feels a little bit loose, you can thread some filament through the rails to tie them all together. Once your rails are on, this is when you'd slide in the long paper strip that contains all your random options. I found that a layer of packaging tape will make the paper a little more sturdy. It also partially obscures how terribly my 2D printer prints. Next, assemble the stand. You may recognize this design from my 3D printed Rolodex project. You just take the front and back pieces and slide them into the slots in the side of the stand. If the slots in the stand are too loose, you can use a scrap of brim from a previous print or a little piece of paper to really tighten that connection up. Now we have the stand and the wheel assembled. It's just a simple matter of sliding the wheel onto the stand, and you're done. Of course, this project needed to be customizable in order to work with different filament spool sizes. But as usual, I've thrown in a few additional options. You can set how thick this frame is, whether or not to include a filament path, the exact diameter of the filament path, the clearance between the parts, which parts you want to display and or print within OpenSCAD, whether or not to include the clicker arm, and whether or not to include this pointer arm. For the last 2 options, consider whether you want the 2 sides of the stand to be the same or not. In my print, I have the pointer arm only on the right-hand side, and the clicker arm only on the left. To make rendering quicker, the OpenSCAD file will only display a single section of the rail, but you can preview what the entire rail looks like by selecting Entire Rail from the Rail Display option. You want to make sure that you turn it back to only a single rail part when exporting though. Otherwise, it will export an entire merged rail, and that is an impossible to print object, at least not without supports. There's one additional configuration option that's not even listed in the OpenSCAD file. These rails have this connecting rod, which could support weights if you want a longer spin. Zip tying or gluing some heavy scrap bolts to these pieces would do it. Just make sure you keep everything balanced. I mean, unless if you want to intentionally weight the wheel, in which case have at it. This project is a bit more random than usual. It mainly came about because I thought it was kind of fun spinning my vertical storage box drawers. But this way, I won't accidentally spill bolts everywhere by spinning it recklessly. If you see some use for this over-the-top spinning selection thing, I hope you print it up. And if you see absolutely no use for it at all, thanks for sticking around to the end anyway. until next week, thanks for stopping by.